everyone. This is Diane Rasmussen McAdie with UK Column. I'm really happy to be talking today with author Rosemary Jenkinson. I met her a few weeks ago at this conference called the Academy, sponsored by Ideas Matter, which was a fabulous conference. And actually, Rosemary's talk was one of my favorite sessions at the conference. So I thought I would bring her on to UK Column to have a discussion with her today. So thanks for joining us today, Rosemary. Would you like to maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you end up at this conference?
Yeah, great to meet you again, Diane, so soon after the conference. Yes, I ended up there because, well, I'm a writer and I had originally been picked up by the Battle of Ideas and I did a couple of sessions with them about writing and the publishing industry. So that's really, they asked me because the conference was about language specifically, and my latest novel, The Memorisers, is about language. So that's really why I was a perfect fit to speak at the conference, because it's my obsession, language and the minutiae of it.
Yeah, I mine too as well. One thing that I don't talk about frequently, at least publicly anymore, because it was so long ago, is that my first degree was in Spanish, and one of the things that I learned by learning Spanish, which I started learning in high school, and obviously kept going and never stopped by studying Spanish language and literature, it actually improved my English skills. And I actually, for a while, thought about doing a linguistics degree, which I started studying early on as well. And various things led me down different paths, obviously. So language is one of my first loves as well. So this is a great thing to be discussing with you, and obviously at a conference as well, for thinking about what language means. And one of the things that I want to bring in early into this conversation, because it's something that we both have in common, is that language has both got us into a lot of trouble.
You could say that, Diane,
Even though we
definitely.
love it, it's, sometimes our loves aren't the best things for us, right? When it comes to consequences. So, would you mind sharing your story? I know it's difficult, but I think it's for those of us who have been through these experiences, I think it's good to get this out there as much as possible for people to understand what actually happens to us.
Yeah, I had written an article about troubles writing and troubles writers for a very small, well, it's a small Northern Irish publication, but it's a very esteemed one called Fortnight. And so I wrote this, and what happened was there was a lot of social media kickback about it, that I had kind of um, been rude about troubles writing and that it was very, very important. Whereas my view was that I want to discuss, or I want Northern Irish literature to be much more than about the troubles. Anyway, so what happened as a consequence of the social media kickback, I received an email from my then publisher, and that was Dura Press in Ireland. And they wrote that they had supported my right to free speech, but the fact was that they thought that it was not going to help them sell any books. And they said, we are rescinding our offer to publish you. And I was due to have a novel published with them. So that was it, gone on the basis, I mean, ridiculously, on one tiny article that there was only, it was only a few writers who kicked back against me anyway. It wasn't like a sort of mass sort of attack on all sides. So it was a very small thing in which to get my work cancelled. And that, so it affected me very deeply. I was so shocked because they'd told me they loved my novel. And it was like, how can you love something and then just turn your back on that for something which wasn't even a terrible thing to say. It wasn't. It was a perfectly reasonable thing to say. It just kind of slightly ruffled some feathers. And all writers in history, the great ones, I think, have sometimes ruffled some feathers.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I would like to put myself in that category.
Yeah, Diane, you
I
know how it
do, I
works.
do. And it's interesting. I wasn't canceled by a publisher, at least not yet. But I was published widely, obviously, as a full professor in my field. And once the I'll call it the witch hunt started coming after me for me speaking out sort of in favor of things that I believed in as a professional librarian and a librarian academic for over 20 years, when I started to not toe the line when it came to things like gender ideology and when it came to things like, what it was that I believed we should be holding on to, which is, professional standards, and they started to cancel me. Um, I know personally, like, because it changed the entire course of my life, which I'm now thankful that I have this wonderful platform with UK Column. But I just want to say, for those of us who have been through this, it's a very painful process, and you end up losing a lot. But you also, I guess, if you want to put a positive spin on it, you also learn and grow from it as well.
Absolutely, we wouldn't have met each other had this not happened. And this is the things you meet the better people who stand up for your rights to talk, Diane. So I'm sure you've met so many great people because of this. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. People I never would have met before. And frankly, nobody from my former life even talks to me anymore from my former professional life. So, but I now have a whole new network of people, and it keeps growing, and it's great. So it's interesting to hear about the publisher deciding to cancel you, because it was actually something when I was looking for a publisher, because I currently have a contract to write a book on basically driven by what happened to me around ideology driving libraries and how that is impacting our access to knowledge and information, and the destruction that is happening within libraries because of this ideology. What they're doing, and you should be concerned about this as well as an author, obviously,
Yeah.
that what they're doing is removing things in grown-up libraries and adult libraries and university libraries where they think it's not inclusive, using that sort of coded language, right? Because we know that
Yeah.
in this case, it's an inversion, that inclusion is actually exclusion.
Yeah.
And in this case, we're excluding people that are, from the history of this country and your country and everything else, because we're trying to be inclusive to the history and things of people from other countries, which I have no problem with adding and expanding collections as much as possible, but don't destroy the origins of this country that built this great university system here that we have in UK. But that's one of the things I'm speaking out about, and people maybe are not aware that this is happening. So what I would like to maybe hear from you about a bit is how, well, first of all, I'm sure you have feelings about that and opinions on that. And I think what we need to do is maybe start to look at this problem together, for those of us who are writers and who want to respect our right to free speech and to share our ideas. I mean, what's your thought on this as a well-known published author that I highly respect?
But well, clearly, any removal of books because of content, I'm completely against. From libraries. Libraries are the place of that we trust, that we can find on everything, and every kind of taboo must be covered in libraries. So I have no restrictions on literary fiction or anything, or even, yeah, or fact. There should be no restrictions as far as I'm concerned. Um, so I am, yeah, I'm an absolutist with you there, Diane. And I think, yeah, the whole thing about, yeah, nowadays we're just so, there's so many taboos that we're not allowed to talk about, and it's ridiculous. And the whole thing about even books that are allowed to be published have to have warnings now, the trigger warnings, and it's an insane. Where does it end? Everything is potentially offensive to one person. There's just no end to it, and that's why we have to stop it.
Yeah, and I'll hold your book up here just so that people can
Oh yeah.
see the cover. I will make sure that there is a link to it in the write-up for the interview so people can buy it. And I believe this is one of the funniest things I saw when I started to read your book, was that it starts with a government warning. Interestingly, and I'll just
Yeah.
read it out because I think it deserves it. The following book comes with a Class A mental health warning. It may propagate deleterious desires for individualism within the reader. Can't have that anymore. It may lead to disaffection within society. Whosoever circulates this book with a view to undermining government authority will be subject to state sanctions. Very scary, Rosemary.
Yeah, it's actually what's happening. So it's a total reflection of society right now and those whole trigger warnings. So that was my fictional trigger warning, really, and warning against being in a library and everything. I mean, libraries in my book is, as you know, have all been burnt down. And so, this is where we're heading. And that's the danger. The dictator in my book says unity through language. So they're trying to control everything. And yeah, clearly books are the most dangerous things for dictatorships.
Oh yeah. Well, and the hypocrisy that I've been talking about in my reporting and talks I've been doing around the country myself is that the other side of it that's happening is and I know that this is a dystopian novel, and I've interested myself in dystopian fiction and films and books as well. The other side of it, though, which is I always refer back to the scene from Brave New World where this director talks to the children about the unbelievable fact that children have maybe wouldn't even have relations until they were older than 20 years old and thought it was unbelievable. And we see this now, that the sexualization of children, something that I cover, is that what's happening is that the libraries are using this argument against censorship to put sexual content in front of children, which I've been covering extensively. But when it comes to people who are, say, over 18, over whatever, in my opinion, they can read anything they want to. Like, I have no restrictions there. But they're inverting that once again to say, well, it's censorship if we don't put sex manuals in front of children. And this is the thing that I've been speaking about, which will also be in my book. So I think that what we're seeing is an inversion of language, and we're also seeing whatever is behind this. And I think there's a lot behind this, a lot of big agenda items behind this. But we're
Yeah.
seeing that twisting it around and putting children in danger and exposing them to things that they shouldn't be seeing. So we're seeing this very strange twisting around. It's really affecting a lot of things right now. I'm not sure if you're aware that this has been happening.
I never thought of it in terms of that inverse, and it's like a reverse infantilization of adults. And in a way, it's to control us, as you say, in order that they can push that agenda on the children. So if we are controlled, therefore they can give whatever ideology they want to children or sexualization because we're so controlled ourselves. So I guess that's what's happening.
Yeah, and what I've heard is because I'm working actively with some parent groups and so on that are concerned about what's being placed in front of their children, that in some cases when they go to the school or to the library and complain about what's being put into the curriculum or being put into the library, is that the parents themselves get canceled by the school or by staff at the school for speaking out for their children. So
Oh, yeah. Okay. So the authoritarianism is totally, yeah, rife in schools now. That's
yeah,
I didn't
yeah.
know that. Yeah.
Yeah, and what's going on with our lovely Bridget Phillipson, the education secretary, who was mandating a national curriculum, and we've seen this going on for some time now, for the past few years, of not only libraries but in education. So saying that children have to learn this because according to the UN and the World Health Organization and the WEF, as we've been uncovering in some of our authors that are writing for us at UK Column, is that because of things like the UN Convention of the Rights of the Children, and they're basically saying, well, we're doing this because of the fact that children are sexual beings from birth, and therefore we can put anything in front of them at any age, and we should be because they're born this way. So again, but then adults can't read what they want because they need a trigger warning to read a novel because it might hurt their feelings. So it's
Yeah.
complete. Everything is completely twisted around.
Yeah, that's ironical completely. And yeah, as you say, yeah, it seems completely twisted. And yeah, I didn't actually know that that children are regarded sexual beings from age zero. I think we develop our sort of sexuality. And there is sexual feelings in us all, but that develops and is often taught. I mean, that's the whole thing. I mean, I think sex is so much taught, and that's what the dangerous thing is, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, but if we're teaching children, because some of these things are being put into primary schools, which means, and also into picture books that are for children who aren't even in school yet. So, a lot of this around the LGBT agenda being placed in front of children in picture books. So there's books like Granddad's Pride, a lot of famous books. I've talked about books where you can even change your species if you want to. That there's you can now that you can there's a book called The Boy Who Wanted to Be a Deer. It's a picture book. You can get it for free on Amazon. And it says, oh, well, this boy decided that he would be so much happier if he were a deer. And so his family let him change his species. And now he has antlers and he's so happy and his family loves him. So this is how we see the pushing the agenda even to, 2-year-olds.
That's
And
yeah. It's
yeah,
it's the whole concept of physical change, yeah, that we can physically be anything that we want, which is quite a sort of quite a leap of imagination.
yeah, right. But now it's on paper in words, so it's okay. But then when we see the trigger warnings that are out there for the rest of the world, for those of us who should be old enough to make decisions for ourselves about what we
Yeah.
read,
It's
not
almost like, Diane, it's almost like a kind of magical realism for children,
Mhm.
in a way that, yeah, you are magic, you can change. So it's really strange. It's very strange. Yeah.
Yeah.
That
So what led you down this path of becoming a writer? What was it that decided to that that made you just decide I'm going to write dystopian satirical novels? Like how did you get to this point before the cancellation? Like when you were writing in just sort of more proper formats that were approved by the authoritarians?
I like that. Yeah, I don't think my work's ever really been entirely approved, but yes, it was tolerated, and also, yeah, they appreciate skill in writing, I think. But I suppose my ideas have always been shaped by the world around me and the politics that are happening. And yeah, I'd always wanted to write about a dystopian world like 1984 because I did believe that we were kind of moving towards that. But originally I got into writing, obviously for love of language, just simply that, as we were talking about. I mean, there's nothing more beautiful than being able to express what you feel, and that kind of satisfaction and yeah, thrill of being able to express yourself on page is a beautiful thing.
Yeah, it's I think it's difficult to considering, as the summary in your book, the book says the West current assault on free speech, and that your truth is the wrong kind of truth, right? And that we see this in 1984, we see this in a lot of different dystopian storylines and novels where libraries appear frequently. And this is actually something I'm starting to do some research on because it's something I've been recently aware of the more I think about it. There's a dystopian film called Rollerball. Have you heard of this one?
Haven't,
It's
no.
it's 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 from the 70s, I believe. And I won't get into the plot of the film, but basically the main character at some point has reason to go visit a library, and it's all been digitized, and somehow something happened. There was a glitch, and the 13th century had been deleted. so that's the reality of digitization. And I was recently, just a few days ago, at a freedom festival, and I was asked to speak on the importance of physical versus print, physical versus digital material. And this is one of the reasons why the physical is so important. That's why it's so great to have your book here physically, because I know that it won't go away, right? That
Yeah.
they won't go in and change it, because that's something else that's been happening with all of the digital content that's out in the world. Publishers, vendors can go in and either remove content. They can change it if somebody complains about it. We saw that with Roald Dahl, who the language in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory was changed because I think there was a boy that the word was fat, describing the fat kid as, and then we can't say that anymore. So changing language of existing novels, but if it's physically in print, nobody can take it away the way they can digitally. And we're seeing this constantly with web pages disappearing. And so it's really important to preserve everything that you can. People can see behind me, this is only a small part of my book collection. I have 3 more shelves in another room. So
Very good.
whatever I have hopefully will survive. Um, whatever text it has on it, because I think it's just so important for us to have lots of copies everywhere, because that's the only way that we can preserve knowledge. And I think that's particularly true with things that, for whatever reason, at some point in the future become problematic. I think that's the word they use for
Yes,
it. So are you the same? Do you have this love of print that you just want to curl up with a cup of tea and a couch? Or
I completely, Diane. Yeah, I am for you can't see any bookcases, but they're all actually downstairs. I have like a huge one right across the living room and everything. So, but yeah, of course, the most important, because you can easily dip into it. It's so much easier than looking up things digitally. It's
Mhm.
you can refer between books. Everything is cross-reference. I mean, the thing about also the Memorisers really is about that she really goes on a mission to find a physical book. And this is really, that's why I'm kind of,
Yeah,
because I know now that if you notice in the novel, there's digital archives that keep being changed. So all this
yeah,
information is constantly being changed. But the one thing that can tell the truth about the past is about the Northern Ireland peace process specifically. She goes in to look for this book and finds books on this. So yeah,
yeah.
so that's how important it is. It is, you cannot change what has been published already.
Yeah, yeah. And that was actually something that I learned in when I did my PhD, which was on photojournalism, looking at the how at this time, this was 20 years ago, but that was when we were starting to convert to digital photography. And so the news photographers that I interviewed were struggling with as well, because um, when something is, sitting in a shoebox in your home, like they had, all of these photos, that especially the freelancers that had shoeboxes, or the ones that work for major newspapers that had large photo libraries where everything is on the shelves. And then that if even if you need to go back to get something historically because something in the news happens, you can go and find it, and it's on the shelf or it's in the shoebox, and recirculate it if you need to. But what happens with the digital photograph is that they're harder to find, right? So
Mm.
if you don't have the appropriate words, the language, once again, to search for those photographs that are associated with it, so that you covered this rally on this day, and these people were present. And then if you need to bring that back later, how do you do that if the words haven't been assigned to the photos? There's no way to find them again. The problem is that photography and language, or like any other medium, there are different languages, and there's translation that needs to occur, right? So the language has to be precise so that it can be found again. But then again, we all use different words to describe things that are not words, if that makes any sense.
Oh yeah, we do, and quotes can be misquoted over the years and everything. And the thing, I mean, just the basic thing about digital is it can be deleted, whereas books can exist in libraries for centuries, and that's a completely different reality, really.
Yeah, yeah, it is. And with the library books, even if you have, let's say you have a book, like a printed book, but it gets converted digitally, or if it's what we call born digital, which is published digitally, you can still search the words. So if you know a few words that are in the book, and you can search the text, and things like, the mainstream search engines like Google are pretty good at searching text, and they can match word for word. But how do you match word for image, right? You can't
Uh-huh.
search an image the same way you can use a word to search. And so then you get into a whole different issue of textual language versus visual language, which is also something that's really fascinating to me. Like, if you look at the cover of your book, this tells a whole story in itself, just looking at the photo, the was this a painting? Was this a photograph? What was
No.
that? And then also the back cover as well, which is also very interesting. So what stories were you trying to tell with those visuals?
Yeah, it was interesting because it was an AI image, and
Yeah,
obviously I was looking. There was a futuristic novel, and it was something that I put into ChatGPT,
yeah.
and and a friend did the one on the back cover. But the thing is about that, yeah, it was. I had the idea that the whole image of the novel was that kind of man fused with a woman. I mean, the character is really very much she lives in a very masculine world in a way that there is war all the time, and she's out at the front line with soldiers. So she lives in that, and also she meets the soldiers. So it's very much the fusion of their relationship, but also it's the image of the Grand Commander. And the
Hmm.
Grand Commander wants to be all things to all people so that there is no need to ever replace them. So they want to convey, even though he's a man in his 50s, he wants to convey this image of two sexes and youth and vitality. And so that was really an idea of that it's up on like the Big Brother in 1984, it's up on
Exactly. Yeah,
on the
exactly. That's
walls.
what I was thinking myself.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it is interesting to me because it's kind of like to me this looks like female on one side, male on the other side, right? And so that's telling, there's sort of all this blending of identities, and this is kind of what we're seeing now as well. And I don't even know if you intended this, but that's what I got out of part of this is sort of um the lack of individualism, right? So we're all sort of blending together. We're all supposed to be kind of the same entity that believes the same things and thinks the same things, and we can't think for ourselves. And maybe I'm reading far too much into this, but that's what I got out of it actually. Um,
That's
Thinking,
good.
right? I guess we all see different things when we read. That I guess it's kind of part of experiencing any particularly good, well-written literary piece of work, is that we all see different things in it. But that's what I saw was kind of the way the individualism sort of leaves the room, right? And now we're just kind of doing what we're told, and that's kind of how we're expected to live right now. And that goes into the cancellations and the freedom of speech, is that you're not acting with the oneness that they're expecting us to act with. And
Exactly.
yeah, and I don't know how we have this is not something that we've discussed previously, but I believe this is something that happened in 2020 when they all locked us up. And I think this was part of the plan in 2020. Sort of this technocracy took over. If you think about it, we lost our ability to communicate. We lost our ability to just go for coffee. We lost our ability. Everything was supposed to be done, on the screen. If you did anything, and that cut off our ability to communicate, our ability to share ideas, to just even see our families, all of those things. And I don't think we've quite recovered from that. And it was really then when I started to see this whole thing sort of taking over, this oneness of, well, we no longer exist as individuals. Stay at home, do as you're told, do everything online, which wouldn't have been possible 20 years before that. We didn't have the infrastructure in place. That I think this has all been part of it. And people seem to have lost their ability in some cases, or feel they no longer have the ability to speak up. And I really think in the last 5 years, this has been something that has happened, is that we are now just supposed to stay quiet. And I don't know if that was your experience of the 2020 era, but that's one of the things that I saw happening.
Definitely, that's what I was saying, that I think it is. I call it the langdemic instead of the pandemic because our
Yeah,
language was policed from much
yeah,
more than ever before at that point. They realized, the authoritarian governments realized that they could completely control us and that we wouldn't come out of our houses. So it was a shocking reality to realize how quiescent and submissive we are to the state,
yes.
and that is still following now. Yeah, our language was controlled from then. So I do feel that, and I also feel the digital, exactly as you say, that was the point that they realized that they could really control us digitally.
Yeah, yeah. And the language, like, there was a meme I shared a few days ago on Facebook with sort of like they were talking to a group of Amish people in this little cartoon, and it said, "Are you worried about climate change?" And they said, "No, because we don't have TV." Right?
Yeah,
So
they're one of the few who aren't controlled.
yeah,
Yeah, leave the thought
they're not
control.
told that they're supposed to be controlled. But it is interesting though, because the language was one of the things that I noticed in 2020 was, the if you think about the term social distancing, the word social does not imply we have to stay away from each other because we might kill each other with a so-called deadly virus, right? It's
Yeah.
social. It's we're not supposed to socialize, and so that message was everywhere. I read a lot about I forget where this comes from. You might know, using things in groups of three. I think it was Dr. Vernon Coleman that wrote about this originally, like the hands, face, space, kinds of things that they were repeating over and over again. Everything in threes, that somehow that is something that sticks in our minds. So we think hands, face, space, and all of those little, save the NHS, protect, all of these things that were, I can't think of them now, but they were sort of all over, not only on TV and on the internet, but even if you were allowed to go into a grocery store, and you would see them all over Tesco and wherever you managed to get out to at the time. And so that language was really important, as well as the behavioral psychology that Brian Garish at UK Column was one of the ones who uncovered this idea of behavior modification through increasing the fear, increasing the threat, the personal threat that was meant to be perceived by the public to control us, to make us stay home and do these things. But that all comes down to language, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I didn't think of that thing about three. So everything is three. Stop the boats, adult,
Yeah.
female, human, everything is. And I didn't actually think of that before. And I totally agree that there was, I remember I went to, about the climate of fear. I went to the shop and I was in the shop. There's nobody else there. The radio was on. It was like, get home now, the radio presenter was saying, and I thought it was in the War of the Worlds, and it was like fiction. It wasn't a real world at all to be under that threat that I was a dangerous person, suddenly by being out there, and it was like. I'm just doing my shopping.
I
Yeah,
know.
I'm the ultimate criminal here.
Well, and then, thinking about the language of even the symbols, right? So when we think about symbols as language, that all of the arrows, the one-way arrows on the floors, remember those where,
Oh
if
yeah.
you
And the
could,
feet.
yes, the feet, the stand here, the circle around it, that's all, that's still all the symbols, but it's still language of like, stand here, walk this way, don't go that way down the ketchup aisle, whatever it is. And so somehow this is supposed to save us, right? Even the language of wearing a mask, right, is still, it's a symbol of fear, right? So even the symbol of, you know, first of all, you're removing your individuality by hiding your face, but also if you can't, so we've lost our individuality. We're also looking at each other thinking, oh, it's really terrifying to breathe. Can't even breathe anymore safely because we're going to die of a virus, right? That all of these things all tied together. It was really funny. I owned one cloth mask that I only wore when I was really forced to. Eventually, I got one of those lanyards that were like said you had an exemption, and I would wear those just so people would leave me alone. But I had one cloth mask which had its own bit of language on it, which it said, "Enjoy the silence."
Great. I love some of those sort of like, yeah, thematic masks and looking like the Joker mask and things like
Yeah,
that. There was a lot of comedy actually with that. It didn't
yeah,
have,
yeah.
but it was still, I mean, it's still completely, I suppose people personalize and individualize their masks, but it's still completely dehumanizing no matter what you do. But yeah, yeah, it was a crazy time. And also I want to say that out of that time, I think that wars began. Certainly, Putin saw that probably there wasn't as much attention on him. Everyone had gone inward. There was no outer world, because every country was the same. There was much happening. This was a global pandemic. Nothing was happening that we were looking at Russia and the build up. He managed to make the build up on the border without a lot of international attention. Of course, that was 2022, but there was still the hangover from the pandemic that we had become more insular. I
Yeah,
feel so. So that I think, yeah. So I think everything, yeah, things could happen that wouldn't have happened normally, but for the pandemic, politically, it wouldn't have happened.
right. And things needed to be in place before that could happen. So we can see that this was planned, that we had the delivery services and the, order your food, order your Amazon stuff,
Yeah.
whatever you want to buy. But if you think about it, even in 2010, we didn't have that level of technology for any of this to be able to happen, to tell everyone to do absolutely everything sitting at home on their laptops. It just would not have been possible. But funnily enough, the people who did have to go out to work, so the Amazon drivers or the Tesco workers or whoever was in part of the food supply chain, for whatever reason, appeared not to have dropped dead. And so
Yeah, yeah,
I,
that was a sign, I think. Yeah.
yeah, right. So I feel like it was, in a way, an attack on the middle class. So those of us who do have jobs, we can work at a computer, may or may not need to go to an office once we have the technologies to be able to communicate remotely with each other, as we're doing right now,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah.
Um, but this would not have been possible for people. So when I talk to tradespeople, for example, that were still out, fixing people's electricity or making sure the plumbing works, a lot of them that I've talked to did not buy into it because they were still out there in the world, right?
Mm.
So they maybe did not have the ability, well, couldn't do their jobs if they stayed at home, and so they were considered key or essential workers. But
Yeah.
they also, just anecdotally, I don't have any statistics for this, appear to be ones who refused the vaccinations because they were out saying, well, nothing's happened to me for the past year. I've been out, I'm fine. Why should I put something into my body? And a lot of them actually were, that I've talked to anyway, were ones who refused to get the vaccination. Whereas the middle class who were sitting at home getting afraid to leave the house were getting these messages that were talking about what's the language saying, oh, I better get vaccinated or I'm going to die, even though they were, we were still locked up for a while after the vaccination program was in place, which should have told somebody something, but it didn't for some people. So,
Yeah.
but I think it's that those media messages are so influential in people's decisions, obviously, to do whatever they think they're supposed to do to save their grannies or whatever they thought it was going to do for them.
Yeah, and yeah, I think it was a middle class. As you say, the working class were out serving, really serving the middle classes in that kind of way. Ridiculous. But they were having, I was jealous because as a writer, yeah, I couldn't get out at all. All the theaters were closed. It was a disaster for anybody who was sort of in that artistic world. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
the
we
things that
suffered.
the
Yeah.
things that happened to the any creative spaces, the music concerts, um, book talks, anything that you would want to do in the creative world, it was all gone. I was living in Edinburgh, sort of towards the end of that time period, and in Glasgow, and so the Edinburgh Festival being such a major event in the calendar for so many people, and that just going away was quite devastating to the economy of
Makes us
Edinburgh.
realize how much we're sort of perilous and a luxury product in the world, under those sort of circumstances. And yet, I would also say I'm keeping going back to the Ukraine war because I think the
Yeah,
Memorisers is based on that. The world in it is based on that. But
yeah,
art is one of the most important things for them to uplift themselves from the war. And the thing is, we completely forgot that, or it was completely removed from us. The art, the that uplifting thing. I
yeah,
mean, we were expected to batter our cutlery against our pans for the NHS, make our own music. This is so it was just sort of like, yeah, again, like childish stuff, but it wasn't art and everything. So yeah, that's what shocked me. I think that we were removed from society.
yeah. And it still, I wouldn't say has come back completely. And then I was quite disappointed in the artists who started, once they started to open up for events again, to say, well, you have to show proof of vaccination to come in. And there were some that did that, and these were the people that I thought were the free spirited, creative types that would just let's let's just get together and make music. They'll think you have to have your vaccination card to get in. You have to, this is not safe otherwise. I was quite disappointed to see some of that happening.
We had a big furore in Northern Ireland with Van Morrison going up against the health minister. So he was
I
like, yeah,
remember, yes, I
very
remember.
dangerous, very dangerous. He kept like parroting these kind of words to ridicule them. But that was interesting because he was under so much attack at the time. And yet, yeah, I think, that time is showing that, he was pointing out the government autocracy at the time. So artists did, at least one artist spoke out, but the majority of us didn't. I didn't either because I probably didn't have that voice that he had, Van
Right.
Morrison. But I think, yeah, I think it shows how conservative artists are. And yeah,
That's interesting because I would have thought, or before this, I would have thought that that a lot of them would be quite the opposite, but I was still in the university system at the time, and I just didn't say anything. Uh, it was very difficult for me to not say anything because I'd be on these committee meetings or whatever with my colleagues, and they would be sharing their vaccination stories and actually planning to take off sick time because they knew that they would be sick after they got the jab because everyone was sick. So they said, well, I'm going to give it a few days for it to work. So I need to plan sick time. Obviously working very well.
yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, there was flu. I definitely had a flu symptoms after, but I don't think I needed a few days off. This is kind of like,
Well,
oh,
yeah, I know everyone had their own expectations, different reactions,
yeah, well, we did have
whatever.
different
But some
reactions, but
people, if they heard other people were getting sick, that even if they hadn't had it yet, they were planning days off because I think partially because university life was so demanding. It always is, but it was
uh,
really demanding after this all started because we were doing everything online and in a very different way. And so again, language became even more complicated because instead of having a conversation with a student in our office for a few minutes, it was all emails or it was all, very much more demanding of time. And so if you were to have any reaction to anything, you would have been completely worn out, exhausted from any effect that it had on your immune system if you chose to take one. So I personally didn't take them, but I was constantly covering for people who did take them and were taking off time. And then so added to my workload, which was already heavy because I wasn't getting sick. And so it was a very, very difficult time. And looking back, I'm just kind of glad that I'm out of the system now because I think maybe that was a sign for me before before I got thrown out that
yeah.
maybe I should not have been there.
It's interesting what you're saying also about the whole your online experiences during that time and how hard that was. I mean, this is something that we should all be saying to tech companies. Online is more time consuming, it's more exhausting for our eyes, backs, and bodies. We don't want to be controlled this way. I don't want this life. I want to be in person doing things. It's far better for connectivity and networking. We were at the conference, as you said, and we made a friendship. We would never been able to do that otherwise. It's in person is the most important thing in life. And we need
Absolutely.
to be kicking back, all of us united against these big corporations and saying, no, we're not living our lives like that.
Well, but it's again, they use the language to push this on us, right? They say it's convenient, it's fast, it's
It's
easy.
not.
But but again, it's the inversion, right? They say it is, but we're all frustrated and like,
Yeah.
no, I don't want to set up an account just to buy something, right?
Yeah, I know it takes ages to buy something in an account. Yeah, and everything, even booking flights and things. Yeah, and oh, I can't remember what strange password I had for that. My computer hasn't saved it. All
Yeah.
of this stuff. It's just problematic.
Yeah.
And all I want to do is just go down a shop and buy it in the
Yeah.
same road I'm living in when I'm going out for my groceries there.
Yeah. And I remember when I was doing all this teaching at home, because I was online with my students. I'm assuming they were there. A lot of them turned off their cameras. So I didn't know if they were there, if they just like logged in to say they were there and went to sleep. Like I have no idea.
Yeah.
They were refusing to turn on the camera. So like frequently talking to 30 blank screens. But then because I was at home with my dogs, and then so a delivery would come or the post would come, and then the dogs would bark as they do. And so if we got through a whole hour and the dogs didn't bark, they would say, Diane, your dog's okay because we didn't hear from them. Like, yeah, they're fine. I just didn't have any deliveries for that past hour.
There, that's how you know they're listening. That's it. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's the
so,
only way.
right.
They're not interested in what you're saying, but
But
they hear the
they did
dog.
want to see the dog, so I always put dog photos in my lecture slides just to like keep them awake. So
Oh dear, yeah.
yeah, but it is about that. It's about when we were talking about communication, that I really did find that it became more complicated because there was not only the recording, there was not only the how do I explain this? Just kind of that different presence that you have to have when you're online versus when you're in person. There's just a different feel about it, right?
Yeah.
And then we started to find out that we had to create transcription because if there were students that had disabilities where they had hearing difficulties, then we had to learn how to do transcription. And it's all very automated now because again this has all progressed so quickly in the past 5 years, but in 2020 it wasn't that way, so we had to find different alternatives to do all this. And people saying, well, this is not to do with my subject area, you're making me do all these extra things that are not even part of it. And the university at the time was actually saying, well, if you don't have a laptop with a camera, record your lectures on your phone. Like, how personal is that? Right. And students are paying fees of thousands of pounds per year to have a lecture recorded on their phones. So all of this language, again, was meant to, I believe, suppress us, meant to suppress, everything that we were doing. And the language was all central to all of it. And I think that is so well um, sort of demonstrated in your book. And I really hope that people read it. So because I don't want to give it away because then nobody will buy the book.
Yeah.
But I really hope that people read it because it does have some really important messages in it, and it's very entertaining as well. So we just have a few minutes left. I don't know if you want to maybe talk a little bit about your book, kind of do your own promotion for it, or if you want to leave it as a
Yeah.
secret for people, or
No, no, I don't want to leave it as a secret. Really, it is about it, there's so many ideas in it, and it's impossible to cover it. But there is the whole idea of the memorizers. Even the title is about memory and how that is removed, how it can be removed by authoritarian governments. Um, and of course, I have a physical dememorization as well, which is interesting in it. But I think also, I think the world in it, I want to talk about that whole kind of thing. We were talking about messaging. And when I was in Ukraine, one of the things that when you're on a train, you see, you're given this thing about nuclear war and what you do in it and how you undress and get washed and everything. And all of these things were being pumped out and they terrified me. So it's quite amazing, the control that can be the terrifying. And we knew that from COVID, but this is even a more extreme one that you're all, yeah, okay, yeah, fevers or viruses are really bad, but this is like a nuclear war is now being. So that's really also how I got the idea that there would be a nuclear war in our. I believe that's totally possible. Because of escalation in the Ukraine war and between America and things like that. So,
yeah.
but it's that fear. So I felt a lot of fear, and the sound of sirens really frightened me in Ukraine as well. That is a real if you're subject to that all the time, it is a hysteria that grows in you. And I know it's to protect people, but it's still you feel controlled because Yeah, because these are sounds that you kind of automatically flinch at. You know, it's very upsetting to your central nervous system to live in Ukraine right now. And I think that was partly to relate it back to COVID. That's what happened to us.
Yeah,
We're kept, no wonder the new generation is so anxiety ridden.
oh, they are, yeah. That reminds me of the early 90s when I was a teenager and the first Gulf War was going on. And my mother had CNN on all the time, right? And they were doing this coverage of the invasion, and when they were supposedly covering they had all the air raid sirens going on all the time. And I'll try to find this link if I remember it. I'll put this in the write up for people to watch. That it turned out that some of that was fake. That they were showing the air raid sirens and saying, oh, and then they would like think the camera was off, and then they actually got some of the footage of them showing them, oh, this is not there. This is actually a background. They're not really in Riyadh. They're not really getting blown up, but they're using this to create the fear.
Mm.
And Brian Garish on UK Column has done an amazing job in the past few years of explaining exactly what's going on in Ukraine and how devastating it truly is. But then all of the propaganda surrounding it that we get over here, and it's kind of what that's all creating for everyone, and as well as the amount of money that's gone into it. Unfortunately, the lives have been lost, lots of money has been wasted, lots of propaganda to support all of this. So again, that goes back to language, right? And kind of how we're being manipulated.
Yeah, yeah, certainly. I mean, yeah, yeah, it hasn't. All the billions haven't worked out. Even though I believe we should support Ukraine in this because Russia
Yeah.
is a
Yes,
terrible
of
power.
course. Of
But it
course.
hasn't fully worked out. And the thing is that yeah, we're still in a terrible situation with it. And another thing I wanted to say about the whole digital thing in Ukraine is that you have this. You have an app that shows you when Russia is launching aircraft with missiles. And
Wow.
but you don't, this is things that people constantly look at because obviously they're frightened. They want the information. They want to know if they should go in shelters. But the trouble is that this is going on like 24 hours 7, this. And sometimes when the aircraft, you don't know where they're going. They could go to your city, they could go anywhere. So you're at an unnatural height of fear all the time without knowing. No information can tell you that. So the apps can be a counterproductive into absolutely terrifying you. You know, so sometimes I feel that technology can give you information, but it can give you unnecessary overload that can totally wear you down.
Yeah, it's all the phone notifications that come in constantly, right? That you have to
Yeah.
continuously turn off on any app that you download, where it's just the constant reminders and trying to sell you things and all the stuff that you have to sort of actively go in and turn off if you don't want to be constantly interrupted by your
Yeah.
phone. Not sure if you've been aware of the recent, well, they did this the first time a couple of years ago, the emergency sirens that went off
Oh,
on people
yeah.
that this could go off at any time, and if we need to alert you to something, your phone is going to start screaming out through the middle of the night, kind of thing. And that's just here, so I can't imagine that, because that sort of the reaction that people get, sort of um, that people feel like they can't constantly need to be checking apps. We get in some cases that it's been researched, the dopamine reaction, for example, by playing online games, that people get this, they need that dopamine fix because it makes them feel better, and that's what gets people going back to playing online games. um, I can't imagine what that would feel like to constantly be checking an app to see when the planes are coming. I can't imagine it, as well as the real life fear of the threat that is actually happening on the ground. And then you have the app and you can check and see, well, where's the plane now? How far am I away? That just sounds unbelievable to me.
Yeah, it certainly is. And that the whole this yeah, apps are so intrusive with Stormo. And did you have one at Stormo? And did you have a one of those beeps on your phone?
No, I had mine turned off.
Oh, right. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, that was
yeah,
another sort of terrifying moment.
yeah.
because I
Yeah,
didn't know actually what was happening. So you're thinking, could this be a 3-minute warning for a nuclear bomb?
yeah, exactly. Right. So we just have a few minutes left. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you have as well. But
Oh yeah.
I wanted to make sure, is there anything else? I always give my guests the option to talk about anything else or say anything else that we haven't covered. So is there anything else that you'd like to share with the audience?
Well, yeah, I'm just going to keep talking about the book, Diane, because
Absolutely.
it's what I'm here for. I'm gonna, yeah, promote it to the hilt.
Of
And
course.
yeah, the fact is, yeah, it's a human story. I mean, the thing is, we know about uh, dystopian fiction can sometimes be a little bit over. You're kind of thinking more about the technology and how in the future, because drone warfare is a huge thing in the memorizers, of course, because that's what the technology has changed for that. But I think the most important thing is the human aspect. I mean, it's 1984, it's Winston and Julia. It's the kind of thwarted love affair. That sounds like Romeo and Juliet to Winston and Julia, but there is that kind of to humanize the future is a kind of really important thing. And I think it's this quest of my central character, Joe Elliott, a journalist who wants to find out why she was on the front line, why she was injured, all of these things that make us human and our quests in life, what of discovery. And I think now, I think particularly in this society where things are crazy, and I think we need to discover things and speak out about them. And that is really the impulse in her, and yeah, I said that came from my own cancellation. We discussed that earlier. And all of those things is about being able to freely speak out and not repress your own thoughts in society and words. And I think that is the most important thing. So that was the main propulsion for the book is to say, I'm tired of being controlled. I need to break free.
Yeah, and I think that this has come out through our whole discussion because we've seen how this is like permeated every aspect of life, and I think that your book does such a great job of sort of encapsulating all of that. I really can't recommend it enough to our audience. So I do hope everyone runs out and buys a copy after they've listened to this conversation because
Yeah,
I think that maybe people realize how much they're being controlled, even those of us who are kind of awake to it. When you see it coming into every aspect of life in 2025, um, you and I have been exposed to it to the extreme and to the fact that it's impacted our careers, but just
yeah,
in everyday decisions that we're being manipulated by words and language. And I hope that when people read it, not if people read it, but when people read it,
yeah.
that they will maybe start to consider as much as possible to kind of just, I would encourage everyone to take a step back and think about how this is just infiltrated every aspect of our lives. And
I think so.
even if we don't think we're affected, we still are. So
Yeah,
I want to encourage everyone to read it. So again, I'll just hold it up one more time. This is
great.
Memorisers, Rosemary Jenkinson. Here's the back.
Yeah,
uh,
yeah. All
and
about
yeah,
free,
no,
free about freedom, yeah, and liberty
absolutely.
from what we're going through right now. Yeah.
Absolutely. And art is such a powerful way to
Art
express.
is the best way to express it. There's no other medium that could possibly express this because words actually are the thing that control. People think it's images, but actually words are much more, even though I think they are because they can be manipulated more. I mean, I suppose we have things like AI that can manipulate images now and deep fakes, but I think words are the ones in which it comes from us. We control the words, and that's what is so frightening. If we become controlled and we can't control those words, so therefore word control is a lot more dangerous for us. Um, yeah. So it's really about being conscious about the words that you're using, but yet not being obsessed about it because the words that you use can be used. Right. We take offense much more at everything today. So therefore the words are more important than that we use. So but yet don't police yourself. And it's that balance. So how do you do the words that aren't going to offend too much, but without policing yourself? And that is there's so many balances going on that we're all checking. And our brain, even when we're having conversations, we're checking that. I'm checking it with you sometimes. I can't help that because I'm so conditioned now.
Right, right. No, yeah, no, that's a really good point. And to end on, I think, because let's just yeah, let's all just take a moment, take a step back, think about are we being controlled? Yes, we are. And what can we do differently in this world about it? Because I always say that it's strength in numbers, that the more of us that realize what's happening, the more of us that make steps against that in whatever ways that we can in
It
our own
is.
lives. And there are so many ways to do it. And so Rosemary, I want to thank you again for writing such a brilliant novel.
Oh,
And
wow.
and
It's been a
thank
treat. It's been a treat to be on with you and have an open and free-spirited discussion.
well, and I think that this all comes through in your writing as well. And thank you to everyone who's joined us today for this conversation. Thank you, Rosemary, for your time. Again, this is Diane Rasmussen McAdie with UK Column. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.